Hey everyone, I am Shadrack Katuu. I'm going to speak about managing records in enterprise resource planning systems. But before I begin, I'd like to state that the views expressed here are mine and should not be attributed to any of my previous employers. I'm going to speak about enterprise resource planning implementation, but before I do that, I'll have some introductory remarks and then speak about how ERPs have been implemented within the UN and specifically the UN Secretariat. And the system that has been implemented is known as Umoja. I will speak about record keeping challenges, particularly those related to application controls, as well as record keeping implications using archival science concepts. I will end with some concluding remarks and then a list of references. Computational archival science is a growing discipline. It's continuously being enriched by both archival science and computational thinking. In the past, this research has been happening in isolation in the two disciplines, but increasingly we can see it happening in concert, enriching CAS in unique and unpredictable ways. We have seen through the workshops that have been held in this conference that there's a lot of activities taking place in both practices and domains, including personally identifiable information, leveraging enterprise architecture in record keeping, detecting and preventing fake videos, as well as context capturing framework for functional classification of records. Computational thinking practices consist of 4 components: data practices, modeling and simulation practices, computational problem solving practices, as well as system thinking practices. I'm going to use system thinking practice as a framework for this paper to explore ERP implementation using archival principles to highlight certain record-keeping challenges. ERP systems have become quite ubiquitous within our institutions. They are based on integrated database that provide functional modules that are increasingly being used to tackle management and integration tasks in real time. And in some of these functional modules include financial reporting, human resource management, as well as supply chain and so on. When managing and integrating processes, ERP systems generate and are expected to manage enormous amounts of data, as well as information in architecturally complex systems. Records professionals that work in institutions that use ERPs require consideration of archival science concepts and practices to ensure efficient and effective fulfillment of their professional roles. This paper looks at an ERP implementation project that was conceptualized in the mid-2000s by the United Nations, and it uses that to highlight certain record-keeping challenges. Discussions about ERP systems have been going on for several decades, tracing back to the 1960s with integrated control package systems, 70s and 80s with material resource planning systems, and from the 80s to the modern times, 3 or 4, actually 4 eras of change around particularly ERP systems, as shown in the table. A global professional services firm known as Deloitte has identified ERPs as being at the center of modernization, where institutions are facing digital transformation, user expectation, and data-intensive algorithms within their core systems. To illustrate this, I'm going to look at ERP implementation within the United Nations family of institutions. This has been going on for at least the last 3 decades. Almost 10 years ago, the United Nations Joint Inspection Unit published a review of implementation, use, and maintenance in 28 United Nations entities. Each of these entities had their own unique implementation experience, the majority of which had implemented one of 3 dominant software vendors. Others had implemented other systems and had gone through a number of experiences. I will look specifically at implementation within the UN Secretariat. And in order to do this, just to provide some context, the UN in general aims to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations amongst nations, achieve international cooperation, and harmonize actions between nations. In order to do this, there are 6 principal organs: the General Assembly, which is the main deliberative organ, where all members of the UN have an equal say. I'll speak about the General Assembly shortly. The Security Council, which has a few of those members on a permanent basis and others temporary. The Economic and Social Council, which coordinates the work of UN entities dedicated to sustainable development. The Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, as well as the Secretariat, which we will speak about in a lot more detail. This is the principal administrative organ of the UN, providing services to other organs and carries out the work mandated by them. In July 2006, the General Assembly, the large deliberative organ, approved a resolution to complete an ERP implementation. They christened it Umoja. Umoja is a Kiswahili word which means togetherness, and which would be implemented within the UN Secretariat. And 2 years later, approved a governance framework and initial funding. Umoja has radically re-engineered how the UN Secretariat manages its administration. It has transformed work patterns and how it conducts business and manages resources. The work began in 2009, so almost 3 years later, and it was deployed. The ERP was deployed in 3 main phases. There's a foundational phase, the initial phase, which implemented central support services, finance and budget procurement, and supply relationship management, as well as project management. Then there was an extension 1 with a few more modules, and extension 2 with additional modules. Almost 10 years later, Umoja had over 43,000 users, and the expectation by the end of last year, reports for this year are not yet published, but the expectation is that this would increase to over 46,000 users. So these users are physically located in various parts of the world, so 422 locations, 150 countries. And by October of last year, the project expenditure over the 3 implementation phases was over $500 million US. Looking at how much work has been put in and how much financial resources have been invested, it's natural to expect that there's been extensive oversight activities through both internal and external audits. The external audit mechanism is known as Board of Auditors. Over the last decade, it has prepared 9 annual reports documenting a total of 115 audit findings. In the most recent report, it identified 18 audit findings. This is in project governance and management, application controls, support, functionalities, and the business case. We'll talk about application controls shortly. In addition, the report noted that the 45 recommendations have been pending from previous audits. A few of them fully implemented, the majority still under implementation. Additionally, internal audit of the office has conducted 14 activities, documented 65 audit findings, the majority being fully implemented and a small percentage under implementation. While the internal audit findings are not publicly available, the external ones are, and they provide a glimpse of some of the challenges that Umoja has faced in terms of implementation, which have direct or indirect record-keeping implications. As I stated earlier, application controls is a major concern. This relates to the general area where we're talking about the management of employee master data, delegation of authority, as well as the quality of data. When we talk about employee master data, 6 different kinds of deficiencies were found. This include incomplete information, errors in data fields such as names, dates of birth, and information about employee beneficiaries. These are employee dependents. And of course, these have huge implications around such things as pension calculations and so on. And I mean, if we have errors in names, then it's fundamentally flawed how you manage your HR information. In order to address this, the report notes that one would have to improve due diligence for cross-verification with employee documentation at the time of data entry by human partners, so human resources staff members, and improve effectiveness in terms of input validation controls. Umoja was seen as a key enabler in terms of a new delegation of authority framework. This delegation of authority framework was put in place in order to decentralize decision making and align authorities with responsibilities. As we stated earlier, there are many entities, there are many locations geographically, and one needs to be able to empower the managers that are working with the necessary managerial authority around human resources, financial resources, and physical assets for them to do their work. But the report found that there was a lack of standard mapping of the type and level of delegated authority requiring the provision of user access in the system so that people have the right delegated abilities. Of particular concern were findings related to user role provision. So user role provision is an aspect of is an identity management process that ensures that user accounts are created and given the correct permissions based on an individual staff member's functions and responsibilities, and that those permissions are changed when the roles are changed. They are disabled or deleted when the users no longer have those institutional responsibilities. The audit findings found that there were 366 types of enterprise roles where users have access to entities across the globe, so global level, and 196 types of enterprise entities that have roles across UN entities. This means that users with such roles have access to perform functions all over the world across different entities, regardless of whether they're domiciled there or not. In addition, more than 19,000, almost 20,000 users had been assigned roles, such roles, which have huge implications in terms of what they're able to access and what they're able to execute. The report also found that in some cases, staff members had left the employee of the UN, yet they still had access to their previous roles, or they had left completely, so no longer employed, or they had moved positions or moved locations or moved entities, yet they still had their roles. This is a big problem. In addition, looking at an example of more than 290,000 user role requests was the issue of validity of data, quality of data, as mentioned earlier. Users would request that their roles are changed, and in 72% of the time, the start date for the requests is blank. In 86% of the time, the end date of the request is blank. And in other instances, you have start dates that are in the future or such a long time ago in the past, for instance, 1999, 10 years before the system was launched. And these quality of data issues are quite grave in terms of managing processes within the system. If one of the expected benefits of implementing ERPs is improved information management and reporting, it is critical that the accuracy and completeness of data is looked at and looked at quite seriously. Otherwise, we would not be able to assign any trustworthiness or confer any trustworthiness to the records. According to ARCHIVAL, diplomatics trustworthiness is conferred to a record by the degree of reliability, authenticity, and accuracy, as illustrated in the ontology in the diagram. Based on the limited information that we have, surmised from the audit reports, two aspects of trustworthiness are of particular concern. One is reliability. This is established by the completeness of the record form and the amount of control exercised in the process of creation. As we have seen, where dates are left blank, the reliability is thoroughly undermined by a lack of validation checks in the system to prevent blank information being entered. Second aspect is accuracy. This is the degree to which records are precise, correct, truthful, and pertinent. Of these concepts, the most immediately evident in the table is truthfulness, which is the quality of a record whose content is in accordance with the actual state of affairs. When dates are long before the system existed, or start dates, and likely end dates are so far in the future that it's impossible to imagine, then we have a problem with accuracy. So an assessment using archival diplomatics could have gone further into various other aspects, but this would require having system documentation to show the solutions, the work processes, and the integration with other applications. Just to conclude briefly, we know that ERP systems have offered organizations opportunity to adopt good practices, operational efficiency, and enhance accountability. However, as demonstrated in projects that are multi-year and multifaceted, there are lots of challenges around project governance and management, but fundamental to this would be the trustworthiness of records that keep the system running. In this paper, we have looked at the UN and its implementation of Umoja, and through its audit reports, illustrated a few of the trustworthiness challenges in user provision. It's by no means a comprehensive assessment, but it demonstrates the kind of record-keeping assessments that could be done on systems. And considering how fundamental ERP systems are to the operational and administrative excellence of entities, it's critical to ensure record-keeping considerations are included in the discourse of systems management. The next 3 slides are references to the paper. I thank you.